you're not going to have a perfect product. You may have a minimal viable product and you're going to try to launch in that capacity, or you pivot. And what we want to do here is make the decision-making process easier for you across your supply chain, across your stakeholders in manufacturing, across the technical aspect of things, as well as the commercial feasibility engineering aspect of things.
Hey everyone, this is Adam Yee, food scientist and podcast host of Startup CPG's new podcast section, R&D Radio, where we interview product developers and what they do and how they can build your CPG business. Today's guest is my friend Brian Chau, who leads Chow Time, an R&D operations consulting firm lowering the barrier to entry and participating in the food industry. They focus on providing a full suite of back-end services from concept to commercialization, and their specialty lies in the intersection of food science and food systems. We dive into why he believes fiber is the next big trend that will eventually surpass proteins, and he explains the term fiber stacking, a science he uses to create functional better-for-you chocolate. Brian also breaks down how to navigate the inevitable trade-offs between cost, flavor, and nutrition to help you build a product that is actually commercially viable. Brian and I also did a fun 10-part podcast mini-series called Food Products FAQ. So if you liked our conversation here, check that out as well. Enjoy this episode with Brian Chau. Hey everyone, this is Adam Yee from the Startup CPG podcast on R&D Radio, and I'm here with Brian Chau, founder of Chow Time, to talk about product development. And so let's get into it. Brian, we've known each other for a long time, actually. I think even pre-professional life. We've had some talks through a mutual friend of ours through college, and now we're kind of in the same boat of product development consulting. And you've helped me a lot with my business specifically, so I'd love to return the favor and talk about Chow Time. And I'd love to know who you are and how did you get your start in product development?
Definitely. Well, anytime it's Chow Time, as long as I'm here. I'm Brian Chau, food scientist, fungal fanatic, and food systems analyst at your service. I run my own R&D and operations consulting firm. I do have a team of 11 other individuals across the United States, continuous United States, from Pacific over to East Coast. So we cover one of every time zone. And we support basically everything on the back end. So we do new product development, reformulation, technical research, design of ingredients, and nutraceutical specifically, all the way over to commercialization. And so that includes sourcing raw materials, command searches, regulatory review, food safety design, COGS development, QA, QC, and sensory. So we kind of do everything on the back end and support, people, entrepreneurs, all the way up to the Fortune 500.
So you do a whole breadth of things all over the nation and even some international, right? If I recall.
Yes. We cover 20 other countries now at this point.
Dang, that's crazy. What do you think you specialize in? There are a lot of product developers out there in the world, and I feel like everyone has their own special niche, but what have you specialized in? And also, what does your team get the most enjoyment out of doing?
Yeah, we specialize in the concept commercialization component. So we de-risk as much as possible. What we try to do is understand what is commercially feasible, what is viable infrastructure-wise, supply chain-wise within the United States or within the country of origin where manufacturing is going to happen. And then the more complex it is, that's what we love to do. So that could be something along the lines of taking a look at a specific breed of tomato, and then going all the way down in the added value processing chain. Same could be applied for cacao or other types of ingredients.
If I were to go to you and kind of have an idea, how does that generally look like to you? Like, how do people find you and what do they say to you? And how do you kind of get to where you want to understand a client a little bit better and what they're looking for?
Well, typically it's a 30-minute to an hour type of conversation, depending on the complexity of the ask. And so if it's a simpler ask, then essentially we would be able to speak about the manufacturing of bars or manufacturing of granola. And if it's more complex of an ask, it's along the lines of, let's say there's upcycling project in which somebody wants to upcycle olives or blueberries, date seeds, and then transform it into something that's added value. That could be an ingredient added value, or it could be an application or a final product of the added value. So those are a little bit more complex, and that takes a bit longer to try to understand what is the end goal, what are the objectives or the parameters in developing the product brief, and then to explain that we work on a per project basis to begin with. And then we break it down into the appropriate phases to allow people to understand how to work with us.
When you say phases, what does that generally look like?
Within the realms of R&D, we look into 4 phases. So the first phase is to understand the sourcing, the infrastructure, the feasibility, taste testing the product, just so we understand the prioritization in the decision-making process so that we can come together and say, these are your rough formulas, these are your ingredients that we're going to start sourcing from. This is the rough estimate on costing and nutrition. Do you want to move forward? And so that's the more of that research component side of things. And then we go into the 3 rounds of development. Once we have the ingredients, once we have an understanding of the process of the contract manufacturer or in-house processing, then we can mobilize pretty quickly in the iterative process and deliver the appropriate samples with all the deliverables from cost to nutrition labels and process.
So you mentioned 3 rounds of development. Do you feel like that's a magic number in terms of rounds of development in a consultancy?
I think it's a good amount of development with regards to rapid development to get into a minimal viable product. And sometimes if it is more of a, say, reformulation, it could end earlier. It really depends on what stage the client is at and how technical they need the support in reformulation or the formulation.
Yeah. So like, for example, if you, a spice mix versus a ready-to-drink product would be a difference in technicality, right?
Right. So like more of the simpler projects could also end earlier in terms of time frame. It depends on how complex the sourcing initiative is as well. But if it's already built in supply chain and it's just one specific ask, which may be substitution of flavors or finding a backup supplier in the case of the worst case situation. So we cover all our bases. It could be a few months. It could be more than a few months. It depends on how complex. So I estimate like it could be 3 months at most for simpler projects. More complex ones would be 6, 9 months, maybe a little bit longer, especially if it's a nutraceutical ingredient development.
Yeah, that one's a big one, right? So speaking of kind of nutraceuticals and all these different types of products, do you have kind of a story about a product that you worked on that you felt you had a really good impact and you just felt good about it, I feel?
Yeah, a tale of 2 stories or 2 chocolates, if you will,
Oh,
instead of 2 cities. Just
uh-huh.
last year, I'd helped develop chocolate products that are more in the better for you functional health perspective. And so one is Dirty Gut, and they're on the Startup CPG channel. And what we supported them on was sourcing the appropriate raw materials so that they have prebiotics and probiotics encapsulated, embedded into the chocolate. And we took a look at the processing from bean to bar so that we can grind down the fibers. And we did fiber stacking to be able to achieve 1 gram of fiber per 10-gram piece.
What do you mean by fiber stacking?
Fiber stacking essentially is to take multiple different types of fibers, indigestive, digestive, if they're GLP-1 absorbed, and be able to cover the spectrum of the different fibers so that there's more benefits than just one type of fiber. So we had an upcycled cocoa fiber from the cocoa husks that was integrated, as well as an acacia fiber, which helped with the binding aspect of things between the fats and the sweeteners. And then we also took a look at chicory root inulin to be able to provide more of a digestive system. So it offers more of these prebiotics for the variety of gut microbiome to be able to digest, because there's a lot of different bacteria in the gut microbiome, and each of them may have slightly different preferences for food or prebiotics to consume.
That's interesting. Wow. So, and you mentioned like, I don't hear a lot about people using stuff outside the cocoa bean, right?
Right.
So, okay. And I'm sure that supply chain, I don't know if you work directly with the farmers or anything like that, but that sounds also really cool as well.
Not in this particular project. We work directly with a contract manufacturer that already sources everything. And so we augmented with all the other ingredients to make sure that we hit the marketing and branding that Dirty Gut wants and be able to make sure that we're able to replicate that at scale. One thing we did take a look into that's heavily in a shortage, if you will, is A2 milk powder specifically. So the dairy industry, A2 is a milk protein that is a little bit more digestible than the A1 milk. It's most prevalent in the United States at the current moment. And in that capacity, because of that digestive gut health benefit, it's in high demand, extremely high demand. Yeah. But the other chocolate is more about women's health. This one is using lactoferrin as a key ingredient. And this is for Femme Health, and it's run by an LA mom who is iron deficient herself, and she wanted to find another way to consume a supplement without having to consume another gummy bear or another powder to make shakes and things of that nature. She's just getting so tired of that. And the iron supplementation through tablets, they don't taste that well. I mean, iron is very metallic. And so lactoferrin answers a different question. Instead of adding more iron in a product, how can we have better absorption? And lactoferrin as a protein binds onto iron for better absorption purposes. So we partnered with the right ingredient supplier, Helena, and figure out the supply chain bean to bar, and went all the way to the farmers to be able to find that these are low in heavy metals, but high, naturally speaking, in iron, and make sure that it's very integrated for the masking naturally, because cocoa is bitter, to be able to have that complementary role to put in some sort of bioactive, in this case, lactoferrin.
That's very cool. And so those are two different nutraceutical-based chocolates. Is that right? Is that the right word?
I am trying to push more for these
Okay.
better for you chocolates, nutraceutical, because cacao or chocolate, generally speaking, if it's not laden with sugar or additives, is generally regarded as pretty healthy, full of antioxidants.
These projects were made during kind of a chocolate supply crisis, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, it's actually very serendipitous. I mean, if you're looking at infrastructure development in the United States, there's not a lot of bean to bar manufacturers. There's a lot of consolidation. And then if you're to take a look overseas, West Africa grows most of the cacao. So what we had to do is find a way to find different varietals, heirlooms or otherwise, smaller farmers, and go direct bean to bar in that capacity to circumnavigate and offer more benefits in controlling the supply chain for each of these companies. And then from there, what we wanted to do was, in Dirty Guts case, we wanted to take a look at upcycling of the ingredients, extend the flavor profile by utilizing the cocoa husk. What we hope to do in the future is probably take a look into the cocoa pulp, the fruit itself, and see, how sweet it can be, dehydrate that and grind that into the process if it's possible. So there's still a lot of early leads in supply chain that we need to set up, but it is a good time to do so because everybody is scrambling to try to reset or restructure their supply chains.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm curious about, with all these supply chain things happening, like how do you kind of figure that out?
I think we try to keep our pulse in connecting with all the different suppliers that come towards our doors. So in some cases, it's ingredient suppliers that will give us updates in terms of in real time they have in stock or they're not in stock of certain ingredients. For the cacao industry, it's such a huge industry. You'll hear a lot from the large players, Barry Callebaut, Blomers, etc., give you updates on commodity trading. And then at the same time, be able to interact with farmers from overseas to be able to understand, what is the reality on the ground in terms of how flexible they are in being able to produce the particular ingredient, being able to produce added value product, and then be nimble to get that into the United States, which is helpful for our import-export and working with 20 other countries to be able to integrate that within the infrastructure of the United States of added value or novel technologies or upcycling, if you will.
Dang, that's a lot. But it's important. It's commodities. I feel like every single food product you ever think about, if even just the one ingredient, has such a big history and such a wide supply chain, right?
Yeah, and we always want to make sure we have a backup supplier if or whenever possible. We don't want to have another situation where it's like a David protein bar type company buying out Epigee. So we try to make sure we de-risk as much as possible for our clients.
You're the second person to mention David Protein. Rachel, who was a mutual friend of ours, also mentioned David, and I just found it kind of funny. I feel like every R&D person I'm going to interview is going to talk about that company.
It's very relevant. I mean, it's not that far off.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. So you've done a lot of different products. You've worked in a lot of different places and have worked in a lot of different segments of the food industry. Overall, what's one piece of advice that you think would be useful for entrepreneurs in CPG as they make or improve their product?
I think it's to create a list of parameters with ranges so that in order to communicate with a food scientist or product developer, we can't read your mind and you can't read our mind. And so to put something on a piece of paper to say, this is what I'm estimating now in terms of expectations on COGS, in terms of what I believe mouthfeel texture would feel like, or what the shelf life should be. At that point, we can take a look at that and be able to say, let's readjust to what's a little bit more realistic, or we can try to push the boundaries of these parameters. And then from there, add on the priorities in the decision-making process. So between, say, COGS, flavor, and shelf life or nutrition, one of them has to take precedent because they will conflict with each other. The best flavor may not be the best cost of goods sold. The best COGS may not be the best nutrition. The best shelf life or commercial feasible product may not necessarily be fitting of your brand in terms of acceptable or unacceptable ingredients. So I think what we want to do is be able to say, let's set the appropriate guardrails. And if you don't know, make assumptions. And then we as the technical people will then help guide you through that process. We'll help challenge or reinforce the parameters by sending you samples and say, this is your best COGS. And we'll do it in a blind taste test. So you can fill out a survey and say, okay, this is what I think. And then we reveal to you, iteration A could be the best COGS, but what do you think about the flavor profile? Iteration B could be the best flavor. What do you think about nutrition? Iteration C could be the best nutrition, but what do you think about commercial feasibility and or shelf life? So on and so forth. And then we can actually come together and say, okay, we've tested the extremes on both ends. Where directionally can we move? Should we reprioritize the decision-making process? Should we double down on the decision-making process, or should we pivot? And I think that is pretty critical in the communication aspect of working with a food scientist.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think as a food scientist who worked on corporate and small businesses, what I understand is that it is a series of trade-offs per iteration, right? So when you show people a blind, like, sample A, sample B, and there's generally a trade-off you have to choose as you kind of go through it, right? And I think that's what we do as food scientists really well, is that we express these trade-offs that you can't have it all in a perfect product, but like maybe you can if you found the right time or if you have the right money. But generally, you have to have a choice about choosing one trade-off versus another trade-off.
Exactly. I mean, that's business generally speaking too, right? You're not going to have a perfect product. You may have a minimal viable product and you're going to try to launch in that capacity, or you pivot. And what we want to do here is make the decision-making process easier for you across your supply chain, across your stakeholders in manufacturing, across the technical aspect of things, as well as the commercial feasibility engineering aspect of things.
In generally, for your client base, what do people value most of through like kind of these trade-off tests? So is it flavor? Is it cost? Does it just depend on the person? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
It depends on the project and the type of company. So startups, oftentimes, they would not prioritize cost first. They'll typically prioritize the better flavor or nutritional attributes that calls out to the specific brand and marketing piece as a point of differentiation. If it's a larger company, cost oftentimes, so long as it meets the expectations within reasonable flavor acceptance, then that's what they'll opt for.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I think at least when I've learned from like people who just start out, taste seems to be the penultimate factor. And then I do feel though eventually cost catches up with you as you kind of build your business and you kind of go through the storm of scaling your business.
Definitely. At some point, people want to expand, especially within the United States. They want to expand to the middle of America. They want to expand their accounts. And cost of goods sold just isn't sustainable at the initial stages that when they launch their product. So they have to figure out a way to reduce their COGS so they can grow their business, reallocate some of those extra earnings into even more working capital, et cetera. So I think in that capacity, it opens up two major components. Do you reformulate through the context of reducing your COGS through supply chain or changing the formula, or do you increase the throughput of the manufacturing capacity to be able to sell more products at a cheaper price because you're amortizing or breaking the cost down for each production run?
Got it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on some trends that are popping up. I mean, you mentioned like nutraceutical chocolate, but what other types of trends or ingredients that you see are popping up in your kind of field of view?
Yeah, I see a crossover in terms of fiber having an uptick, especially for
Mhm.
gut health perspective, and different types of fibers, whether it's like upcycled, digestive, prebiotic, the variety of fibers and where it's coming from, and the benefits is growing and growing. Would still say that it's still falling behind protein at the moment, but it is growing in demand. So I would say that's like second or third top of mind for a lot of people. And I think this kind of follows the trend with the GLP-1 readiness and with food
Mm-mm.
as medicine as well as initiative from a healthcare perspective. And in some aspects with the MAHA movement and the regulatory changes in accordance to MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, in that perspective. So you have a combination of these different variables from a macro perspective where fiber is becoming a key attribute in that perspective. And then on the other end, ingredients as bioactives, as nutraceuticals that fall under women's health and wellness or sexual health and wellness, and these niche that are becoming pretty big sectors. And so bioactives could be better extraction processes for mushrooms, taking a look at kava in certain capacity, taking a look at ingredients like lactoferrin or something that's similar. These are ingredients that I see that's trending upwards as well.
So, do you think fiber is going to catch up to protein, or do you think protein is always going to have this handle on the world? Because right now we see protein everywhere, right?
I think fibers are going to catch up and surpass the protein at some point.
Oh, big
And
claim.
I think it may not be the next 5 years, it may be 10 years or so. And I say that because fibers could also have the benefit of multiple functionality. So some fibers, like acacia fiber, can bind and act, it's a gum, essentially. It's another word for a gum. So there's a way to take a look at fibers for extra flavor profile, like as in the cocoa husks and cocoa fiber. Same could be said with, say, blueberry skins or raspberry seeds. So we're looking at flavor extension. We're looking at antioxidants. We're looking at color contribution in certain aspects of things. We've taken a look at upcycled pomegranate like shells for added color and flavor as a cocoa replacer. Same thing with plums and date seeds as a replacer for coffee. So there's a lot of variability that we could utilize, and oftentimes it's coming from fiber, or these upcycled ingredients are pretty high in fiber, generally speaking.
Huh, I haven't thought of it like that. That's a really cool insight. I always thought that fiber will affect things as more research comes out with the health. I think colon cancer is something that I think a lot of young, people in their 30s worry about. And I think if there's more data that associates what causes a reduction in colon cancer, which I have a hunch is going to be fiber, I think that's where it's going to like overtake protein.
I agree. I think, I think it was last year, there's some studies that came out or research that came out where people are looking at what is the heavy metal count in these proteins, these concentrated proteins, etc. Then also people are, if you can overconsume protein, then essentially at some point you need fiber to push the protein through the body and the system because not all the protein may be digested. And so fiber is coming to compound as an extra benefit for these high protein products that may not be easily digestible for a large population size.
That's true. I'd love to know, like, you have an obsession with mushrooms, and I'd love to dive into that a little bit more. Let me hear a little bit about mushrooms from you.
So I love mushrooms. I grew up loving mushrooms. I forage for mushrooms. I grow mushrooms. And in terms of mushrooms, there's a lot of different mushrooms that are not only from an edible perspective, culinarily speaking, but also applicable from a traditional Chinese medicine or holistic perspective and nutraceuticals. And so with this love and the added value of nutraceutical sciences and extraction, we are taking a look at different elements in having more bioavailability of each of these bioactives, taking a look and exploring novel processes such as refractive window drying, for example, to be able to create flakes to have it better dissolve into water. And so it's pretty exciting to see where we can push the science and the extracts and discover and explore new bioactives within mushrooms, not only from a culinary perspective, but also from a nutrition and food as medicine perspective.
That's really cool. And I think I'll wrap up here. I'd love to know where people can find you and what kind of companies that you seem to gel well with. And also, I think we should talk about our podcast that we've done in the past called Food Products FAQ.
Yeah, we've done a podcast, Food Products FAQ. It's 10 episodes. It walks through a specific component of the consulting process, whether it's contract manufacturing only or sensory only. And I think that gives a wide perspective of the breadth of knowledge and capabilities that food scientists do, not just only product development, but the multifaceted approach that is required in the development process and the research process that goes through it from concept to commercialization. So definitely check that out. It's both on our respective websites. You can check my website is chow-time.com. And I believe both of us have links to each other's websites. If not, at least the logo or something of that nature, I have to double check. And then we like to try to understand the more complex the question is around how do you feasibly manufacture a product. We love to dive deep into that. So we were taking a look into things that are complex as how to make a ready-to-heat ramen meal kit. And so we want to take a look at how do you make the bone broth? Is it easier to find a contract manufacturer to just do a concentrate or a bouillon rather than the soup base itself and then ship that soup base? And then how do we find the ways to assemble everything in a different manufacturer and then freeze accordingly so that you don't have everything kind of like, say, the noodles inside the soup get soggy and then get frozen into soggy state. So how do we work in that capacity? Yeah. So more complex in that manner is pretty cool to us. More complex in the context of how do you take bioactives or proteins or fibers and put it into chocolates, if you will, and the different supply chain components in that aspect of things. That's what we love to do.
Love it. Well, you love to do everything. I think, it's always been fun talking to you, Brian. And I'm glad that you're here helping people bring their products to life.
Likewise, Adam. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for listening to Startup CPG's R&D Radio. I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. We've now arrived together at the end of another episode of the Startup CPG podcast. I'm proud to be part of the team that's part of the top globally ranked podcast in CPG. As you may know, we're not just a podcast, we're a community of brands and experts, and you should join. You can sign up at startupcpg.com, and you'll then get invited to our online Slack community and be informed on great guests and amazing networking opportunities to get you in front of buyers, investors, brands, and more. Thank you for listening and have a great day.